The last of the daylight was drowning in the mud, and Peter, a parchment-seller from Gloucester with blistered feet and a near-empty purse, knew the rules of the road. You find an inn before dark, or you find a ditch. The cold was starting to bite through his threadbare cloak when he saw it, a smear of firelight in the distance, leaking from the shutters of a low slumped building. The sign above the door, creaking in the wind, showed a piebald bird, the pied crow. It wasn't a welcome sight. It was the only sight. This is the true story of a night in a medieval inn. We're going to walk in with Peter, our fictional guide, and experience it all. The dangerous camaraderie, the mystery stew, the shared beds, and the very real threat of the man sleeping next to you. The first sign of salvation was not the building itself, but the column of grey smoke struggling against the dusk. To Peter, it was a more beautiful sight than any cathedral spire. His feet were sodden lumps in his boots, and the autumn chill was beginning to bite through his wool cloak. The Pied Crow, as the creaking sign announced, was a low, timber-framed building that seemed to sag into the earth, as if tired from centuries of hosting tired men. He pushed the heavy oak door open and was immediately enveloped by a wall of sensation. The heat from a roaring central hearth, the thick smell of wood smoke, roasting meat of uncertain origin, and unwashed bodies, and the roar of a dozen overlapping conversations. This was not a place for quiet contemplation. It was an assault on the senses, and after a day on the desolate road, it was a welcome one. The innkeeper, a barrel-chested man with a leather apron and a permanent squint, looked up from a tapped barrel. A penny for the night includes a place at the board and a spot in the loft. Ale is extra. His tone offered no negotiation. Peter nodded, fumbling for the coins. In this space, the transaction was sacred. No coin, no warmth. It was that simple. He found a space at the end of a long trestle table, its surface scarred by 1,000 knife cuts and stained by 1,000 spilled cups. He was packed shoulder to shoulder with a grimy carter on one side and a silent, tonsured pilgrim on the other. This was not dining. It was a necessary refueling, a communal ritual of survival. The meal, when it came, was a single, profound entity, a wooden bowl of stew and a hunk of dark bread, so hard it could have shot a horse. This was the inn's true heart, the great equalizer. The stew was a perpetual mystery, a cauldron that was never emptied, only ever replenished. The innkeeper's wife would ladle out portions, and the pot would be topped up with whatever came to hand: a scrawny chicken, a hare, the dregs of a porridge pot. Some travelers said that the pot at the Pied Crow had been simmering since the old king was a boy, its essence passed down through generations like a dubious family heirloom. You did not ask what was in it. To ask was to admit you were new, and to be new was to be vulnerable. Peter broke off a piece of the bread, a trencher, and let the greasy, murky broth soak into it. The flavor was a complex symphony of smoke, salt, and something deeply, fundamentally meaty. It was not good, but it was hot and filling, and in that moment, it was everything. The drink, however, was the true lifeblood. The ale arrived in a clay mug, thick, cloudy, and warm. It tasted like fermented grain and hay, but it was safer than the stream water outside. It was also strong. As the fire crackled and the room grew louder, Peter felt the day's tensions begin to unknot. This was the inn's alchemy, transforming the fear of the road into the camaraderie of the hearth. With bellies full, the atmosphere shifted. The functional eating became a boisterous social event. Dice bones clattered on the table, and coins changed hands amidst shouts of laughter and groans of despair. A minstrel with a lute missing 2 strings began a ballad about a lost love, his voice competing valiantly against the din. By the 10th verse, half the room was singing along, inventing lyrics where they had forgotten them. This was where news traveled. Peter listened as a cloth merchant from the next county complained about bandits on the northern road. A local farmer grumbled about the Lord's new tax. A rumor that the French were massing ships was debated with intense, ale-fueled seriousness. The inn was a live nerve center of the realm, a place where gossip was as valuable as currency, and a well-told story could buy you a drink. It was here that Peter noticed the man in the corner, He wasn't drinking heavily, nor was he gaming. He was simply watching, his eyes moving from face to face, his own features obscured by a hooded cloak, though fine leather boots peeked out from beneath it. He was a man out of place, a quiet knife in a noisy scabbard. Peter felt a prickle of unease, the same feeling he'd had on the road when he thought he was being followed. When the curfew bell clanged in the distant town, the revelry reluctantly died. The innkeeper bellowed, "Last call for the loft! Claim your spot, or find the floor." The great hall transformed with practiced chaos. The tables were pushed against the walls, and thin, lumpy mattresses stuffed with straw, some releasing small clouds of dust, and what Peter hoped was chaff, were unrolled onto the floor. Privacy was a fantasy for richer men. The common loft was a democracy of discomfort. Peter, the merchant, the carter, the pilgrim, and a dozen others lay down in a row, so close he could smell the carter's breath and hear the pilgrim's prayers. The man from the corner took a spot near the ladder, his back to the wall. The loft was alive with sound, the symphony of the road, a cacophony of snores, coughs, mutters, and the constant skittering of rats in the thatch above. The air was thick with the smell of old straw, sweat, and damp wool. Peter pulled his own sleeping sack tight around him, a thin linen barrier against the resident fleas and the unsettling proximity of strangers. He had heard stories of throat-cutting and purse-cutting in places like this. His hand crept to the leather purse tied securely inside his tunic, feeling the comforting shapes of his few remaining coins. He stared into the darkness, every rustle and creak a potential threat. It was in the dead of night, when the snoring was at its peak, that the cry came, a sharp, choked gasp, followed by the sound of a struggle. Peter's eyes flew open. He saw a dark figure hunched over the pilgrim. There was a brief, silent scuffle, and then the figure darted toward the ladder. But the man from the corner was faster. He moved like a shadow, intercepting the thief at the head of the ladder. There was a thud, a grunt of pain, and the clatter of something metal hitting the floor. The innkeeper arrived moments later, holding a guttering tallow candle that cast dancing, monstrous shadows. The light revealed the hooded man from the corner, holding down the carter, who was now whimpering, his wrist twisted at an unnatural angle. On the floor lay the pilgrim's small carved reliquary and a wicked-looking eating knife. He was after the pilgrim's relic, the hooded man said, his voice calm and low. Thought it was jeweled. The innkeeper's face darkened. He kicked the carter, not out of cruelty, but with the weary anger of a man whose business was being disrupted. "You know the rules. You steal from my guests, you answer to me and the magistrate." The rest of the night was spent in a tense, wakeful silence. The carter was tied up in the storeroom. The hooded man resumed his post. Peter did not sleep again. The illusion of safety, so carefully constructed by the fire and the ale, had been shattered. The inn was not a sanctuary. It was merely a crossroads where the dangers of the road were concentrated under one leaky roof. The next morning, as a grey light filtered through the cracks in the shutters, the incident was not spoken of. It was dealt with. The innkeeper dragged the carter away, presumably to the local constable. There would be a fine, perhaps a stint in the stocks, or if the carter was a repeat offender, the loss of an ear. Justice here was local, swift, and brutal. As Peter prepared to leave, settling his account for the extra ale he'd consumed, he saw the hooded man mounting a fine horse in the courtyard. He was not a merchant. He carried himself with an air of authority that spoke of nobility or royal service. "I thank you," Peter said, approaching him. "You saved that pilgrim from a loss greater than coin." The man adjusted his glove. "This is the third inn on this road where I've heard of such thefts. The same method. I was waiting for him to show his hand." He gave a curt nod. "The roads are dangerous, parchment-seller, but sometimes the greater danger is the man who shares your bread." With that, he spurred his horse and was gone, a solitary figure melting into the morning mist. Why did they come? Why did anyone subject themselves to the mystery stew, the flea-ridden beds, and the very real threat of robbery or worse? Standing outside the Pied Crow, ready to face the road again, Peter understood. It wasn't about comfort. It was about connection in a vast, fragmented, and often terrifying world. The inn was a fixed point. It was a node in a human network. The news from the merchant, the warning about bandits, the shared song, even the confrontation with a thief, all of it was part of a vast, unwritten conversation that pulsed along the roads of England. The inn was the internet of its age, a place where information was traded in real time, where alliances were forged, and where a traveler could, for a single night, feel part of something larger than his own solitary journey. It was a social contract, written in firelight and paid for with coin. It was dangerous, but it was alive. Peter pulled his cloak tight and took his first steps onto the muddy track. Behind him, the pied crow sat, silent and seemingly asleep, but from its chimney, a thin wisp of smoke still rose, a promise to the next weary traveler that within those walls, against all odds, life, raw, loud, and unforgettable, was waiting. It was not a refuge from the Middle Ages. It was the Middle Ages in all its grimy, vibrant, and perilous glory. And for those who dared its door, it was the only light for miles. The journey doesn't end here. Watch the next story to uncover more, and let us know in the comments below which tale you'd like us to bring to life next.